Hi everyone, in this video we're going to be talking about functions, and we're going to be creating a special type of function called a recursive function. Now, in the previous videos we've defined functions before, we've called functions, we've passed parameters into our functions, and we've even returned values from our function. But in this video we'll be doing something slightly different with using a recursive function. Now, a recursive function is a function that calls itself. So let's start off by defining our function. So if you've been following along with the previous videos, I'm going to just delete everything and we're going to start from scratch by creating a simple function to start off with. So to create our function, we'll use the keyword function followed by a name, and we're just going to call this function test. And test is going to take in a parameter, but we're not going to include that just yet, and we're going to have two curly brackets. Now we're going to pass in a parameter here in a second. We're going to pass in a number, but just for this first example we're not going to pass in any numbers. And inside our test function we're going to just do a simple console log test. So we've now defined our function test, and we're going to get it to console log out the test every time it's called. So if we go and call our function like this and we go and run our program, we should see our output as test, and so we do. Now what we want to do is we want to call this function inside the function. So we want to do this. We can copy our test call and we can place this inside our test function. So what's going to happen is we're going to start off here on line 1. We're going to go to the test function and call it. So this is it here. Then once we go inside, we're going to console log test. And then after we've console logged test, we're going to go and call our test again. So we're going to jump back up here and we're going to console log test. Then we get down here again, we call the function console log.test, it's called again, and so on and so on. So if you remember with our while loop, this sounds pretty similar to that, but you'll see the problem that we encounter now in a second. So if I go and run this, you can see, oh, we've got a problem. So if we go up here, if you scroll up, you can see there has been a lot of tests printed out, and there's probably a few hundred different tests printed out, and then as we get to the bottom we get this error message, right? And the problem that we get is basically that the maximum call stack size has exceeded whatever we have on our machine. Now for some machines tests will be printed out more. On better machines you'll be able to print out more of these tests before you run into this error. On machines that are not as good, you're going to reach this error pretty quickly. So the problem that we have is we are stuck in an infinite loop basically, because we have our function that's calling the function, which calls the function, which calls the function, so it never ends. So we need to do something to try and prevent this from happening. Okay, so we need to use a conditional statement, and we can do this by using an if statement. So we can say if something is true, then return 1, and once 1 is returned, then our function will be ended. But if it's not 1, or let's say if our num is not less than 1, we want to go and call our test function. But to do this, we need to go and pass in a number. So we're going to start off here. Once we call our test function, we're going to pass in a number. I'm going to put the number 5, that's what we're going to use for this example. And now we're going to pass 5 into test, and we'll call this num. So we want to go and now check to see if num is less than 0. We want to go and return something. So we want to go and we could say return 1. So this basically means once num is less than 0, it's going to return 1, and once it returns 1 from this function will end. But if this condition is not true, it will be skipped. So then it will console log test, and we're going to go and call test again. So what we're going to pass into this test function, will be num minus 1, because we can't pass in just the num that we have here, which is 5, because again we'll have the same issue. It'll keep going and going and never end. So that's why we have num minus 1. So if I go and run this again, we see that test is printed out 6 times. And rather than having test, we could have something that gives us a little bit more insight. So we could say num here instead. So if I go up here and I click run again, we can see that we start off with the number 5 because that's what we've passed in. Then we go and print out that number 5. Well, initially we first of all check to see if the number that is passed in here is less than 0. It's not, so this is skipped. Then console log our number, which is 5. That's what we passed in. Then we go and call test again with the num, which is 5 minus 1, so that's 4. So then we go back up here again to test. Now this time it's num minus 1. Num is 5 minus 1, that's 4. So again, 4 is still not less than 0, so this is skipped. Then we console log this. This is 4 in this case. And then we get down here, and our current num at this stage is 4. So if our current num is 4 minus 1, which is 3, now this function is called again. Again, this is skipped, and this is console log the number 3, and then so on for the other numbers. And that's what a recursive function is.